to listen to Corinne talk about metadata management, that key foundation to building trust in your data. And we're going to talk more about the business metadata, because it's easy for us to talk about technical metadata because that's what we get slammed with most of the time. But that's right. Why aren't we doing more with business metadata? And I think that's about all you want to hear from me. So will you please welcome Corinne tonight, and please.
Thanks, David, and thanks for giving me your speaking slot. David and I met at a conference earlier in the year, and we've been talking about this for some time, so I'm glad that the night's finally arrived and I get to talk to you about a project and an initiative as part of rolling out information management at Sydney Water that I think actually has added so much value in terms of engaging the business in how managing data can really add value to them. So I'm going to give you a bit of context around Sydney Water and the organisation and why data is so important to the organisation, and also obviously talk to you about how we built capability and some of the use case that we're using and some of the outcomes we've got since we've implemented the technology to help us manage metadata. So some context around Sydney Water, the largest water utility in Australia, supplying over 1.7 billion litres of drinking water and treating and collecting over 1.5 billion litres of wastewater for over 4.9 million people in the Greater Sydney region. We are an asset-intensive organisation, so that means that we deliver services to our customers through assets. Data management applies itself really well to asset management, because after all, data is an asset. So we've actually really taken that opportunity to tie the concepts around asset management to data management in the organisation. In terms of the assets that Sydney Water manages, there are dams obviously that supply bulk water that is treated for drinking water, infiltration plants, managed through reservoirs and pumping stations to get to homes and businesses, and also pipes and treatment plants that treat wastewater and discharge it when it's clean back into the environment. The area of operations for Sydney Water is extremely large, 12,700 square kilometres, and covers the Illawarra in the south to the Northern Beaches in the north and out to the Blue Mountains in the west. The challenge for Sydney Water and other utilities and infrastructure organisations in Sydney is that there is a significant amount of growth occurring. By 2031, Sydney can expect an extra 1.3 million, 570,000 new homes and 625,000 new jobs. If you go further to 2056, the population will be over 8 million people. So it's putting a lot of pressure on natural resources, infrastructure, and utilities and other organisations such as transport and government organisations, as well as local government, are needing to respond faster and do things differently. And data provides a lot of opportunity in terms of planning and making decisions that can enable the infrastructure to support the growth as it occurs. So when you think about utilities and asset data, that's just one aspect of data that is used and consumed to make decisions, to plan for Sydney's growth and Sydney's new or enhanced infrastructure. So things like customer information are important, understanding what the customer needs and what types of services the customer will rely on, the different types of dwellings, the growth information, the projected growth versus what growth is actually developed. Other external information such as climate change and conditions that are happening in the environment. Sensors and IoT, so the water utilities do use SCADA systems, and they provide information on our assets and help to manage assets in operations, and that lends itself to leveraging other sorts of external data and technology such as IoT to help make decisions. Obviously asset performance information, understanding how to manage and maintain our assets and what their performance or optimising their performance. And financial information to make decisions on what type of assets we need, how we design them, at what time they're delivered. So that's the context of Sydney Water. But what I want to talk to you today is more around the journey to building a business capability and the use cases that we had to demonstrate the value of metadata management. So I was privileged in 2014 to be able to get executive approval for information governance at Sydney Water, and that was the start of a journey to actually building a significant investment in resources in the organisation. So I was charged with designing and leading and building a team of 60 people to manage mainly asset and location information, but obviously other types of information to make decisions about our assets and customers. But to do that, as you probably know, not everybody is doing information management and there's not always capability on the market. So we had to build it. We had a team in place that managed data, but we didn't have information management capability or experience, and the market, even if we were to go and recruit to supplement those skills, wasn't going to be able to enable us to implement information management capabilities from the beginning. So there was a real need to build capability. I liken this to my personal experience of learning, and I have 2 young daughters, and one of them fell in love with the game of soccer. I'd never played soccer in my life. I played basketball at school, but she joined a team, and after a year the coach moved on. At the same time I was trying to get fit, and one of my friends said, "Can you come play on the women's soccer team?" So I was learning to play soccer. So when the team was without a coach, I had to step up and coach the girls' soccer team while I was still learning to play myself. It's funny as an adult how you actually look at how you respond to a new situation, and I guess I got a lot out of that, because not only was I learning to play the game, I was practicing it, I was teaching others to play it, I was having to read up on it, I was having to run training, I was having to perform on the field with the team. All of those things had to come together, at the same time, and I liken that to the experience we had at Sydney Water. So here's my story of me being soccer coach, and this is 3 years ago, by the way. I'm still the coach of that team. That girls' team is now 3 years older, and as I say, I think when you have people that are willing and have an open mind, and you put the things in place to build capability and learn, anything is possible. So now I'll talk to you about how we did that at Sydney Water with information management. So my mandate was to build an information management and analytics capability. So it's not that we didn't have data management and analytics in the business. We did. It was just disparate. So we brought it together and consolidated it, and that formed Asset Knowledge, which was a team of 60 people. Over the course of the few years preceding this, we'd embarked on information governance, as I said, and we'd set up information governance, a stewardship model, became familiar with information management framework the organisation wanted to use, which is actually largely based on the DAMA model, which I quite like because it's actually quite business friendly and orientated. Then I had a team to build, and the first capability that we were implementing as the team was being defined and designed was data quality management. Now that was a really good capability to start with, because everybody talks about data quality problems in the business. So we'd already embarked on that journey of information governance and data quality management, and we'd already flagged that we needed to actually manage information securely as well. IT were doing that for us, but looking at classifying our information security was another capability we're already working on under the information governance model. But as I said, I had the privilege of actually forming this team and setting up a team that would look at the data strategies, the data models and data dictionaries that the business would use. We applied the role of governance within the structure of the team. We embarked on defining a business glossary for the first time. And that, I would say, that is also a really valuable thing to do, and is, as you probably know, an element of metadata. Metadata management is something that I'll talk to you a bit more about. That was the next capability that we worked on. But at the same time, we also focused on what was our master data, how we managed reference data, And we're applying it to supporting things like our modelling and analytics capability that already existed and our BI reporting. So using our foundational capabilities and uplifting all of those other capabilities was something that we focused on early in the development of the team. The other thing that we added to this team was knowledge management. And that was really to look at how unstructured data could be governed and managed. Now, it can be very different, but you'll look, when you see the use case that I'll talk about today, there is application of metadata, obviously, metadata management to unstructured data or content. And I think the business actually really responds quite well when they can see the lineage of data right through to their documents as well. So that we found that quite useful in thinking about unstructured data and content at the same time. So as I said, we designed the team, we put people in roles, and we started to build capability. Some of them are informal projects with an IT enabler, like our data quality management had a tool, and that was a formal IT project that was business-led. Other things like master and reference data, we're defining those things before we have a tool, and we will get there eventually in terms of enabling them through technology. But 2 or 3 years in, and there has been significant progress in the maturity. The maturity level, usually when you embark on these things, is around a 1 or 2. You know, we've got to a 3, 3.5 in things like data quality management and our information security classification processes, and metadata management is getting there too. And that's a fairly good result in a reasonably short period of time. So let me talk now about engaging the business, because it's easy to get excited and I guess into the detail around how you're going to think about selling the benefits of data quality and why we need to do information security and things like that. But when you're talking to the business, they don't really respond to those sorts of technical terms. And so one of the things that was done early on was to understand how data is important to them, to our stakeholders inside Sydney Water. And this is a way that we actually used to engage with them so that we could always check in and communicate with them in a way that was meaningful into what they were going to get out of data management capabilities and the work that we were doing. So we spoke about it in terms of the business want to be able to find information easily, understand it and know what it means. They want to trust the information, have confidence in it, and also know that it's secure. They'd like to use it to derive insight and analyse and make database decisions. They want to be able to visualise it because there's so much more meaning when you can visualise information, and spatial information is really important when you're looking at geographical representation of assets. And they also want to be able to share information, so they want to be able to consume information with other agencies and external people, and also share information that resides within the organisation. So we use this lens, if you like, or this communication mechanism to check in with ourselves on when we're working on a capability, what are we trying to achieve, what are the benefits the business are going to get, and how do we communicate with them on it. So we've found it really useful. And we've also implemented, or as we've implemented projects, defined personas, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So here you can see in the middle there, this is thinking about it from the lens of a planner at Sydney Water. So I did want to make a reference to the DAMA data management model, and particularly the functional framework is quite useful to talk a bit more about why we've actually focused on things like data quality management, metadata management and information security. They're, as you can see in the model, they're foundational activities, and they actually enable the organisation to do the higher level capabilities such as analytics and things like master data, etc. Most organisations know that they need to master their data and sometimes embark on something quite big like a master data management program. I think that's a bit more challenging when your maturity is low. And so we've actually found that we've grown capability and maturity through things like data quality management and our metadata management that actually are really big foundational stepping stones to things like master data and reference data management, and also already enabling analytics far more than we were able to before. Obviously governance goes without saying. You can't actually run any data management process if you don't have your accountabilities and roles defined. And that's something that needs to mature in time, but it's useful in getting that set up first and then quickly moving into the execution of data management capability or function, if you like, and apply it to a business problem. So I'll talk now about metadata, which is what we're here to speak about today. So what we're talking about here is business metadata, as David mentioned. So our IT group were very excited when we started talking about metadata. But then when we were working with them more closely, they realised that we were actually talking about a different type of data, metadata. The team actually did a lot of work on the capability before we actually started to implement it. And I think that's also an important thing to understand is if you have a team that's building capability, it's useful to take the time to look at what it means, how it will be applied in the business, and actually work through that as a team and defining what you mean by that capability. Defining your maturity, defining the maturity you want to be at, and what your path or your roadmap is to get there. In saying that, it doesn't have to take a long time. We used Agile and Scrum methodology, and we defined the metadata management capability in an 8-week sprint. Yes, you build blocks on top of that over time, but you make progress and you add value as you go. So it doesn't have to take a long time, but it's useful to focus on your definition of the capability and what it's going to mean to the business. So as I said, we focused on business metadata and things like the business glossary, and data cataloguing. I was speaking to somebody earlier about that. So understanding your data assets and your business glossary were precursors to us really implementing the tool that we're using to manage metadata and also look at our data lineage. You can't really do data lineage without a tool very easily, but certainly the conversations and the engagement with a business glossary were also highly valuable. The business for the first time could start to actually understand what they meant using the same terms, and the conversations changed. And over time, it was interesting to see the groundswell and the advocacy in the business for what we were doing in terms of the business glossary in particular. And our business glossary and our metadata specialist is here today, and I would go to numerous management meetings and her name would come up. She became famous because people were just raving about the business glossary and how useful it was. So something really simple like that actually can have a huge impact in actually getting that, garnering that interest and I guess support for your information management capabilities.
Sorry, is that because there was a lot of extra information in the business glossary with the metadata tags and stuff like that?
Not initially. We were just trying to define what they meant. Because being an organisation that has a long history, over time the definitions had evolved. So it was bringing it back to what do we really mean, and is this different to that, or is it the same, and can we be more consistent? So it sounds fairly basic, but you do find in large government organisations that have gone through various restructures over their history, a lot of it is tacit knowledge and it's in people's heads, and over time it changes. So it is really foundational, and again, it doesn't have to take too long. And initially we put on our intranet site so people could view it and people would direct people there. So there was visibility. It's not ideal to manage it that way, but to start out with, it certainly was good. It does break down silos, that's what we found. I guess the other thing I will say about the asset knowledge group in Sydney Water, it sits at the front end of the asset value chain. So a lot of the policies and strategies are coming out of that part of the business. So ownership often sits there. So it was fairly easy from the top down to find likely owners of certain. For example, there is an owner of assets, and that's the general manager, and then under that there are roles that align with what would be the most likely owner of the business term. So that's part of the exercise of doing a business glossary. You need to be able to implement governance with it. It's not just defining it, I guess, is the key. So this is another look at metadata management being a building block for all data management capabilities. And at the conference that I spoke at, where David was there, I did a presentation on how metadata has really helped our analytics capability. So things like data cataloguing for data sets and understanding what happens to data, the inputs and outputs of models and things like that. The capability of metadata really helps with that, and also the business glossary comes back in. So we have got some benefits around building a data cataloguing capability, for example, and applying it as we go through and build new models in particular, which will mean that those models are much easier to manage and the metadata of those models are going to be known. So the use case that we had for when we were actually building metadata management capability, and we actually went to the asset owner at the front of the asset value chain in Sydney Water, and found a use case that we knew was a priority for him. And I engaged with my colleagues with the help of the team to actually develop the use case, and we presented it to them to get their buy-in, because it still is a fairly abstract concept, but they couldn't disagree with the idea that, for example, this use case is around the 4-year price path that Sydney Water puts forward for to set prices for water in Sydney. So they go to IPART, the regulator, with a proposal of what they're going to invest in the following 4 years when that's approved. Now, in the past, and it's always a big challenge to get that submission together, this is about planning what assets you're going to invest in, what assets you need to renew, taking into account growth, taking into account ageing assets and continuity of supply. But it's also the precursor to all the business cases that will go forward in that 4-year period. So the whole funding of asset management investment is via this pricing submission. Now, the challenge that has been there in the past, and certainly was still fresh in the minds of the executive when we were working this use case up, was that we have multiple people in the organisation prepare the business cases and do the analysis on the data to prepare for that submission. It's all done separately with expertise in the business, but it's very hard without that person in the room with the regulator to be able to answer all their questions with the data, because often it is down to that key person who actually understands that data, analyses it, and crunches all the numbers, and so it's hard sometimes to justify some of the investments that you've actually planned to make. So the use case that we put forward was metadata will help you build confidence and trust in the submission, and you will be able to tell how that number or that submission has been presented by using metadata without necessarily the key experts in the room. You'll be able to see data lineage and understand what information and assumptions have gone into making that proposal. So it was quite a big, hefty goal really, because the price submission is quite broad. But we did take the approach that we'd focus on end-to-end in the use case, the priority submission points, if you like, and prove it out and engage with the business as we went. And the capabilities that we looked at, we'd already started on our business glossary, as I said. We had that in Excel. It was ready to go. We had some governance and owners defined around that. We'd started doing information cataloguing about a year before this as well. At the same time, we were developing our metadata management capability. Business lineage and data lineage, as I said, is very difficult to do without a tool, so that came a bit later. But also, when you have information governance in place, when you have a tool that can actually enable it through workflow in terms of who can make a change and who is the owner, you have a mechanism to resolve issues. You've just got to implement it through the tool. So all of these capabilities were in various forms and different levels by the time we actually moved into fully implementing it. So a lot of work had gone into the use case and the building of the capability and doing things like growing our business glossary and information cataloguing capability separately, and we just adjusted that when we moved it into the tool. So end to end, it was probably over a 12-month period from when we explicitly started working on metadata management, and probably 6 months or a bit over 6 months to this point in terms of this use case. Again, we used Agile Scrum, and we've had a team that have pretty much been dedicated to it. And in saying that, they're all business people. We engage with the business and also the team in asset knowledge. We haven't had much input from IT at this point because we haven't necessarily needed. The tool we've chosen is in the cloud and is fairly business friendly, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is an example of the persona work we did. So at the start of the project, it wasn't just about defining the capability, but defining the pain points and how metadata would actually help the business. So this required obviously some education and conversations with the business on what metadata was and how it could help them, particularly find, understand and trust information that they would use and consume to do their job of planning and building scenarios, for example, and proposals for plans for new and augmented infrastructure and assets. So they went through workshops with the business and actually came up with personas for about half a dozen or more key roles in the business. And then business journey mapping was done around the current state of how metadata flows in the organisation, or how difficult it is, it is to find information and the network of people that are required to make that happen. And up the top there you can see strategy, plan, build and renew, operate, maintain and dispose. That's the asset management life cycle. So mapping the personas across that life cycle helped give a view of how metadata is used and consumed, and the data artefacts are used and consumed as well. So these visuals are really helpful for the business to understand, like, this is what we're seeing the problem is, and this is how data is making it more difficult for you. And obviously this is what we'd like the future state to be. So people can actually see that they actually can search, find and understand information. They know where to get it, they know who owns it, there's change management processes, etc. And it's much easier for them to do their job and spend less time searching, preparing and cleansing data, and actually using and consuming data to do their job is really what we'd hope to be able to achieve. I wanted to show this slide because this is a bit about maturity, and I would say we were the same a long time ago at Sydney Water when we started. We obviously started with a fairly low maturity. I mean, you wouldn't start building capability if you already had a reasonable level of maturity in your business. To achieve our outcomes, like most capabilities, you probably need about a 3.5 to a 4. What you can see there is that the orange line is the business perspective, so our business stakeholders rated our capability metadata higher than the people working on the project, who actually had done a lot of definition work and actually really understood what metadata management was. And that goes back to what David was saying earlier, that people hear the word metadata and they think it means something, or it means something to them, but what does it actually mean in terms of capability? Because unless you shift the dial in terms of that capability, then you're probably not going to realise the benefits that you expect. And I must say, when we embarked on information governance in 2014, the organisation rated itself higher in that first assessment than it did a year later, because we'd learnt and we'd actually understood what information governance was, what the information management capabilities were. And the same thing happened when we did data quality. So it's interesting to see what you actually think when you're fairly unaware where you are, versus when you actually start working on it, how much you actually can grow your understanding in a relatively short period of time. So this is an example of the data lineage and the tool that we're using, or the outputs of the tool that we're using, which is Calibra. So we decided to find a business-friendly tool, but not, I guess, overemphasise the technology. Calibra we've got it in the cloud. We don't have it integrated yet. There will be lots of benefits when we do. But to actually prove out this use case, having all of that good work that we've done in the capability and a data catalogue and a business glossary that we could put straight in and understanding our data assets, it enabled us to show in a matter of weeks the lineage between those core data assets for this use case. So here you can see that there are different assets there, like systems and databases. There are business governance assets which would have your business glossary terms in there as well. But what business governance documents are there that govern the processes and the decisions for this IPART submission and investment planning? This is a particular instance of Malabar Wastewater Network Growth Servicing Investment Plan. So you can see it actually it's quite useful now to talk to the business about all of the information inputs that feed into their submission. And you know, the tool is quite interactive. You can click through and go to deeper levels to understand more information underneath each of these, obviously. But that's the nice thing about a business-friendly tool, is it's very visual. And when you start showing people that you can actually show a map of how things relate to each other, data lineage, You can actually understand who the owner is. If you want a change management process, you know where to go. This will be really useful in terms of the regulatory submission. Having conversations about, well, how did you get that number? You know, well, we use this model, and this model had this data import, and all of those things. And as I said, it hasn't been years and years and years, and this is quite complex information. These models are quite complex, and the submission, as I said, are full-blown business cases for investment in infrastructure. So that it's not like they're really simple pieces of data or systems that we're talking about, but data lineage actually simplifies it, I think. So it's been really beneficial since the tool has been implemented in terms of further getting engagement with the business. If we had engagement before, this just took it to another level. So you can see here, measuring ourselves against, okay, do we think that this helps the business improve their trust in the information? And that's what the planners had said that they wanted. So this gives you a breakdown into, if you click through some of those data assets, a bit about the data asset, where it comes from, how you know, if it's accessible, or how you can get access, who is the owner, and you can put obviously security classification and the different areas that information is used. So it's a very visual and user-friendly tool. The tool is accessible visually through for anybody in Sydney Water that has a user ID and password. So from a read-only perspective, and then we have licenses for the team to actually manage and get all of the information in. As a capability build, you might open up with more licenses, but we're just wanting to make sure that we actually control the entry of information and are working out ways to do that are going to be consistent across the organisation in the first case. And I'd recommend that too, that building a capability, I guess your business technical capability of metadata management with a smaller group of people before you leverage it right across the enterprise. So I asked the team also to come up with some lessons learned, because I think that's always what you want to hear, because it sounds very easy when somebody gets up here and presents what you've done, but certainly as you go through these things, you learn a lot. Not everything you can read and document, and every circumstance can be different, but some of these lessons learned will ring true for most organisations who are implementing metadata management. So as I said, the foundational capability was defined. Obviously measuring your maturity, where you are and where you want to be, is a really important step. The team had to grow capability, as I said in my soccer story, as they went. They didn't have the luxury of, I guess, having people come into the team who'd done this before. So they were learning by doing and reading and sharing. So we implemented things like the 70-20-10 model as far as personal development in the team, and the team took ownership over their own learning and applied it in the projects they were working on. So if they were working in the metadata management project, we supported them with programs which were 30 days long, that actually gave them a great head start in terms of, these are the types of places that you could go to learn about this. There were videos and content to read, creating learning circles and enabling them to get a great foundation for their learning path, and then that just builds on itself as the team get a higher level of expertise. They obviously reach out for further and more in-depth information. But there are lots of online training courses. There's quite a lot of content on the internet that's freely available now too. We started off, as I said, just developing the capability outside the tool in Excel. So the Business Glossary Data Dictionary is the information catalogue. The governance structure that was in place broadly was applied in the same way to this capability. They designed the metadata model, and they worked with the information and data consumers to understand the business processes and how information flowed through them. So it really gave the team a really strong foundation on the business and the capability and how those two things came together. And then the technology was implemented. So there was some aligning of the work we'd done to the way that the tool could be easily configured, and the approval processes and workflow were then able to be implemented. And as I said, lineage is not really easy to do outside of the tool, but once you actually put it into the tool, it becomes a lot more visible and possible when when you can see it, and also that became a really great step forward in terms of business engagement. And I guess in terms of the learning, the team grew their data language and the business data language in terms of the business glossary. They developed a more intimate knowledge of DIMBOK. They used Agile and Scrum, and we'd implement that and build that capability ourselves as well within the team. So it was they were learning a lot of different things at the same time. And really, I guess they got a really strong understanding about where their organisational capability was, where they wanted to be, and what it takes to get there. And that's a really valuable experience when you're implementing any information management capability. The one thing that they did say to me was that if they were going to do something differently, they would probably spend more time getting really clear on the business requirements. And I don't think that's anything to do with that the team didn't actually seek out business requirements. I think it's just hard to gather business requirements because the business don't always know what they want. So I think the clearer the business requirements are at the beginning, the easier it is for the team and for the project to succeed. But they've done a really great job in getting there anyway. And then, finally, I just wanted to say that it's really the foundational capabilities that make a big difference, and you can move faster in the analytics space. Also, if you've got these capabilities in place, often you don't not have to do analytics projects. I'm not saying that you do your foundational before you can get there, but often people are underwhelmed by their outcomes in the analytics space because they just aren't able to sustain and scale their information management capabilities. But metadata management is a key one. And I'd just like to acknowledge the team. This is not a piece of work I did on my own. You can see it's quite a big piece of work, and I've spoken a lot about the team today. So they're all here if you have any deep technical questions that I can't answer. So Tammy, Sue, Maithri, Rebecca, Kerry, Murray, Adam and Katie were all instrumental. Some of them came into different parts of the project, and some of them have moved out of the team since then, including myself. But they all contributed to getting to where the team is, and there's a very strong capability at Sydney Water now because of the great work they've done. So they're just sitting in the back rows up there. I can introduce you to them if you have any technical questions later. And I just would encourage you to link with me on LinkedIn. I actually have moved roles in the last few weeks. I have moved to PwC to help other organisations do what I achieved at Sydney Water. I'd been at Sydney Water for 7 years, and I felt like it was an opportunity to go and learn and work with other types of organisations in other sectors. And I'm very new to PwC, but I'm still working in the data strategy and information management space. So please stay in touch, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much. DMBOK, as you know, it's all integrated, right? As soon as you start talking about one thing, you're talking about another thing. So did data quality come up in your conversations a lot?
Yeah,
And
I think data quality always does. It's something that the business can understand fairly easily. But I think if you're managing your metadata, then you've got your business glossary behind it, you've got your data lineage, data quality, it does become visible, but then you can actually solve it and resolve it because you have your governance processes in place around change management.
Exactly that. So were you initiating sub-projects or whatever to improve the data quality?
No, I guess I don't. I think at this point it's just mapping where the data's coming from through lineage, and the work on the business glossary had already gone forward. So the other thing that it does is that if people are writing a document and they can see that somebody else is using the business glossary, and you start to get that alignment, and data quality improves over time, and that is really the ultimate goal in terms of if you look at the next price path when everything should be in place in terms of data lineage and business glossary, and it'll be far more mature. We'll reduce rework and people be using the same terms, and that'll be embedded in the business. So data quality does improve over time just because you've actually started to use a common metadata capability in those terms, and data lineage are visible and known, and people know how to use that. But certainly you're going to run into data quality issues with your metadata.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just have a question about the makeup of the team. I think you mentioned that they came from the business.
Yes.
Can you just tell me about
Yeah.
their skill set and what positions they came from?
Yeah, there was a data and information team prior to this, but they were probably just the SMEs that understood the data in the systems. That was mainly the function of that team at that time. So the team had business knowledge. They had an understanding of data and how it worked in the systems, like where it was, and you know, they had quite intimate knowledge of the source systems from a business perspective. But no formal information management processes, if you like. So I guess they had the ability to, because they already had the understanding of the data that the business had, to grow knowledge in business process that helps us manage data. We also brought in some people from the market that might not have had a pure background in information management, but had done things like data quality or data profiling and things like that, so different complementary skill sets. And there were also some other people from across the business. So I would say that as we went further on, because we obviously did initial formation of the team and there was some recruitment, then over time you just get this natural change in the team. As we started to recruit to backfill roles, if there was turnover, we just looked for learning agility because it's so new. If somebody has an interest in data, has a willingness to learn, and has done a multiple of roles, like have changed career, you know, maybe it shows that they can actually throw themselves into something and learn it. And sometimes that's good because you're learning best practice now. 10 years ago, best practice has changed, you know. So if you're learning it now where it's far more mature than it was generally, there's a great opportunity. So I'd say a mix of skills. And, you know, our business glossary specialist had no background in data, but is really good at actually the English language and making a definition. You know, sometimes you can actually find, if you really think about what skill would be required to do that task, you can get them from a completely different role and give them the support and the team the support to learn and grow. And when you're running a project, and great leaders, I would say that. I was lucky I had great managers in the team that were leaders. So they didn't tell people how to do it, they encouraged them to learn and grow and supported them in that. So I think leadership and change, which you always hear when you're talking about information management, is important as well.
I have a question regarding the link between what you described as a business metadata, using taxonomy and business glossary, with the technical metadata, that somehow the two need to be linked. How did you accomplish that, or was there anything effort made in connecting Calibra to some other artifacts that are typically in the technical world?
So Calibra does identify what systems and databases the data is linked to, but we haven't got that integrated as yet. I think often, and this is where it's a challenge over time as a system is built and the project finishes and people change and move on, and people don't understand or don't trust the data that's coming through the system then. So starting at the top level with your key data elements and your key terms and filtering from the top. Obviously there needs to be some connection to the technical metadata, as you say, but I find that the approach that we've taken by getting the top layer of business terms and business metadata defined really well will make it much easier to now translate that. So you're probably going to find the biggest opportunities when you're starting to do things, and this is something that Sydney Water's looking to do, for example, with the data models. When they're starting to renew them, they've got a great opportunity that they're going to be able to sustain those data models. It's very difficult to go back to the old ones and actually do it in the reverse way because it hasn't been managed.
For a simple question, how did you get the whole idea of this data governance thing up in the first place? How did you get buy-in?
I think the executive had an appetite. They know there was a data problem. In some ways, I think it was timing. There was me and one other person in the organisation that had roles that led data teams, and so we worked together on the concept with the architects in IT to formulate this idea of how information governance could support a lot of the problems. So most organisations are hit with regulatory compliance problems, and there's no, in terms of, for example, for us, in terms of asset data and are we able to use our data to manage our assets so they don't fail, for example, and things like that. So looking at what the burning platform is a good way, and I actually did engage the executive with a story about a problem that they were suffering and how data governance could help solve that. But I must admit, I would say that it's gone in peaks and troughs at the executive level, because the executive changed over time, over the 7 years or so that I was working on it. But I had a great sponsor in my GM that enabled me to build out that capability also in asset knowledge. So I think the organisational change and the ability to get a significant number of people and that investment in information management has what's enabled it to succeed. So you need executive sponsorship, but you also need to at some point be given people and capability to work with. Because you're not going to sustain it by just saying you have governance. And people can't always do it on top of their day jobs. You do need they often are called enterprise data officers or chief data officers. And I think getting those runs on the board and proving, getting some business benefits is key as well. And in case you can't tell, I've just kind of been the advocate of this at Sydney Water, so I'm quite passionate about it. And actually that's why I've kind of decided that I need to branch out, because I think there is so much opportunity for organisations to achieve so much more with their data, and it is difficult, but if you just got to take it one step at a time, and there is good practice out there now to achieve it. Even 7 years ago, I don't think there was anywhere near as much on the internet. Now you can just go and do online courses for free, and in the last 2 or 3 years, the proliferation of content around information management and governance has really increased.
My question was around tacit knowledge loss in an organisation, and how you dealt with that, where there just wasn't anybody to provide the information that you're looking for.
The organisation does have a lot of tacit knowledge, and I guess having the data team established quite a way before information governance helped, in terms of people generally knew what processes were using information and how the core systems were supporting information in terms of how data was structured in the system. I guess Sydney Water, like most government organisations, has gone through a lot of change, and you do lose tacit information on the way, but you tend to rebuild and build new capability and processes. So in some ways you do lose a bit of that, but in other ways we've got really long tenure. So we have people that have been in the organisation for their whole career. Some people have worked there for 40 plus years. And so there still is that around, but there probably is in the next 5 to 10 years that risk. So it's good that we're kind of starting with it now. We have really committed and passionate people in the organisation, and so there are lots of SMEs that actually really want to help fixing data, but then you've also got that flip side of but I've got all this expertise, and giving it away can be hard for some people. So winning them over and working with them on solving their problems becomes key.
From overall, and now looking in the future, how much do you think that this is actually bringing value to the increasing complexity and entropy of information for going forward to more reliable systems and the future in automation, because to automate we need to understand the data, not just to support the existing process.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right, and that's why metadata is so key in terms of higher order information capabilities. I think the organisations are really have a strong appetite for automation and things like IoT, but if you don't have trust in data, or if your business rules aren't understood, or they need to change over time and you don't know that, then there are some real risks, and that's organisations might start to realise those risks. So that's certainly I must admit, a lot of senior executives don't realise how reliant their business is on those key people. and when you do lose them. So getting metadata in place and those business rules and those business terms documented enables automation without the reliance on somebody being able to check and give advice. If it's done well, there will always be visibility on it. So it's certainly a key foundation, and I think the only way that organisations are going to succeed to automation.
Just a very quick sub-question. In terms of reporting, like how much the business has the confidence that actually their reports are really reliable?
Well, metadata metadata can help with that, but we know that a lot of people actually manipulate their reports because they don't trust them. So it's and a lot of organisations still use Excel for a lot of reporting. So metadata can certainly help with reporting. It can help with trust and understanding of documents and also of the key data attributes and key core data elements. So it has wide application right from structured data right through, and things like consuming voice, unstructured information or video requires metadata as well. So
And I think with the business community becoming more data literate and understanding the why are we doing what we do as data professionals, we got this obsession for some reason on managing information and doing it properly, and now we're hearing people are interested in improving their stuff as well. And what we've seen this evening is an incredible example of someone who's taken it to the line and done an excellent job. And I really appreciate it. On behalf of everyone here, thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Thank you.